Wow.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of 5460. It is the Joe West podcast, and it doesn't get any better when it comes to guests, as we have a gentleman who has done so much in the game of baseball. He's a Hall of Famer. He's a former MVP. You think of the month of October, you don't think about Halloween. You think of Reggie Jackson, and he's our guest today. Reggie, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to 5460.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
No, and I
Not,
like it the way they
not,
introduce
not.
you, boy. I tell you what, you were Mr. October. I look at the statistics you had, and I know you only played half as many years as I umpired, but it was quite impressive, and I'm really proud to call you a friend, and it was really unique. And thank you for so much for coming on with us.
Joe, did you ever umpire? Because they didn't have interleague play. So, did you ever umpire any of the All-Star games or any of the World Series that I was in?
No, I was telling somebody that the other day. I said, I've known you all these years, and I don't think I had you in a single game. I don't think I had you in spring training games.
Wow.
And
where was your spring training? When did you start in the league?
I started in '76.
Okay, so wow, I had 11 or 12 years with you for us, to be together in baseball.
And we never had a game that we were both in at the same time. I think that's the only reason you talked to me, isn't it? Because I never called you out.
not really. I hardly ever argued with an umpire.
No,
that's the truth. What are you laughing at?
No, I know that for a fact. In fact, you told me one day on the set of The Naked Gun, you said if I had a problem with the pitch the umpire called, I would step back, keep my head down, and say, I don't think that was where it was, whatever you would say, but you never tried to show an umpire up.
Yeah.
And every American League umpire I talked to about you would say you were a prince of a guy. So I thought that was unique, So
yeah, I never thought that the umpire. I should say I never thought that the umpire got involved, but I was a swinger. I struck out 2,500 times, and I bet you I didn't strike out 200 of them looking.
Well, no, because you were trying to put the ball in play. That's a big thing. I can remember the times we met at Pebble Beach because you still have a place out there, and I remember the one day you pulled up next to us on the road on number 3. And one of the guys I was playing with was a big Yankee fan. Another guy I was playing with was a big A's fan. Mm-hmm. And the fourth guy in our group was Steve Ripley. And you got out of your Escalade, stepped over the fence and said, "Hey, cowboy, how you doing?" Because I did wear a cowboy hat whenever I played at Pebble Beach. And those two guys from Oakland and New York, they couldn't talk because they got to meet Reggie Jackson. I said, he's a human being like everybody. He's a good guy. And they were so excited about that. So those two guys think I set the moon because I introduced them to you. But
yeah, I remember.
I remember exactly when you did that. And you stepped right up over the fence, left the car parked in the road.
But hey, Reggie, I wanted to ask you a question, Reggie. You and Joe never were on the field at the same time, but one of the most fascinating books I've ever read is one you and Bob Gibson worked on together. You guys didn't face each other as well, except I think maybe in an exhibition game at some point. What was that relationship like, having a chance to work with Bob, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, dealing with one of the greatest players of all time, and yourself?
I never saw Bob in a game that counted. I did face him in the All-Star game a couple of times, and I remember getting a double off him in Atlanta, and I hit a ball off the right field fence, and I got around the second base, and he had turned around and looked at me, and I immediately put my eyes down to the ground. I didn't want to look at him. I didn't think I was going to show him up or anything like that, because he was. He let me see, the outs. I want to say the outside of the plate belonged to him, and he thought the inside of the plate belonged to the hitter. And I just didn't want him to give me any payback for being a smart aleck, But I remember
his payback was painful.
Yeah, that's right. We were both retired, and he was doing a book called 60 Feet 6 Inches, and it was supposed to be being done with Hank Aaron. And for some reason, there was some conflict. And so I was the go to guy after Hank. And I was so honored to be part of something with Bob Gibson because I looked up to him. He had paved the way for minorities. He represented everything I loved about baseball, about being a baseball player, how he went about the game. And so it was such an honor for me to do the book with him. And that's been my memory since. We developed a great relationship after that. And I can remember the best thing about my baseball career is I was a baseball player who was pretty good, but I was a fan. And I was a fan of the Gibsons and the Duke Snyders and the Johnny Benches, who was a peer of mine. Mike Schmidt, and then of course Mays and Aaron and Billy Williams and Ernie Banks and McCovey, Fergie Jenkins, and I just admired those players so much because I was a baseball player that was a baseball fan, and so I gathered autographs. I still have memorabilia. I have Willie Mays' last glove that I bought and still own, and I've got purchases like a Mike Schmidt bat or a Pete Rose bat or a Johnny Bench bat, um, a Greg Maddux glove, a Sandy Koufax glove, and things like that are in my collection because I was a fan.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of people that appreciate everything you did. I look at some of the stats that you had. You had 10 first place teams in 21 seasons. So half the teams you played for finished first in their division or won the pennant or went to the World Series. And you had back World Series wins with the A's, and you had back World Series wins with the Yankees. And the fact that you love the game as much as you do, it just shows in everything that you did. And even the fact that you collect the stuff even today. I think a lot of kids today don't understand the history of what brought you up here. And I know that you went through the minor leagues like everybody else, and you even alluded to the fact that John McNamara helped you when you were in Birmingham, which was in the South, where you were in the AA system. And it couldn't have been easy for you to grow up at that time in the minor leagues to get to the big leagues. You want to talk about that just a little bit?
It was difficult. I remember going to spring training in 1967 in Waycross, Georgia, and all the black players, colored players, had to go into town in Waycross, Georgia, together to get our supplies, toothpaste and things like that, deodorant, etc., stuff to wash your clothes and things. And then we had to get off the bus, go get our stuff, and then come back. And then we stayed in one barrack. All of black and Latin players stayed in one barrack. And then I was slated to play in Birmingham, Alabama. And I did not want to go there. I didn't get into it, but I talked to our owner, Charlie Finley, about just not wanting to go because I was fearful of the racism in the South. And at that time, it was just a couple of years away from the fire in the church where the Klan had burned the church down, along with 4 little girls that were in it. And it was a scary place to go for me at the time. It was a lawless place. They had a guy that ran the town, or was the sheriff in the town, named Bull Connor, and that name is etched in with racism. And so I was very, very fortunate to have a manager there, John McNamara, that when we traveled, I was the only colored on the team, only colored black player on the team. And if I couldn't eat in a restaurant, we'd get all the food bought out to the bus. If I couldn't stay in a hotel, we'd drive on and go find a place that would let me stay. And the first time it happened, we were in Knoxville, and we went into the lobby and got ready to check in, and they pointed at me and said, "He can't stay in here." And so McNamara took the whole team, and we went down to the next couple of couple of places. And I remember George Lazarick, who was a Cuban right-hand pitcher for us, and also Gil Blanco, who was a Mexican. But it was hard to see. They were Latin, they looked white, and so they would go in and see if I could stay there, and then come out and let Johnny McNamara know if I could or not. And of course, he would always protect me. So, from Dave Duncan to Joe Rudy and Raleigh Fingers and those guys that I played with, I was really looked after, protected, in reference to being a minority in the league in those days. Joe Rudy and I became roommates, and it was a big story that he and I were rooming together, and we were just two buddies that were hanging out together. It was just a cool thing for us.
Well,
Reggie Jackson is a Hall of Famer. We're having a chance to visit with him. 5460 is where you find us with Joe West. Reggie, the month of October is here, and as I mentioned at the outset, there are two things that we know about October: Halloween and Reggie Jackson. Where did that come from? Because you found a way to be on the biggest stage the game had to offer, and you produced. When did that all start for you?
It was 1977, or 1973. Joe Garagiola. We were playing against the Mets, and I had a good day one day, or I had a good day against Seaver in Game 6. I think I drove in 2 or 3 of the runs, and we beat the Mets 4-2 or 4-3, something like that. And I had a good day against Seaver, and he had called me the Autumn Child because I was playing well in postseason. And from there, then in 1977, I went to the Yankees, and in October. On October the 1st, I hit a couple of home runs and drove in run number 100 and hit home run number 30. And that was a milestone back then. And being a free agent with the Yankees, it was a big deal because I was the highest paid player in the game, and I had lived up to the reputation. And so after the game, they came in, and Thurman Munson had a good day, but he was pissed off that day or something. And he said, "I don't want to talk to you. You guys go down and talk to Mr. October there. Go let him talk." and so that stuck. And from there, I went into the World Series and postseason, and they picked up on the name Mr. October, and it stuck. I had a good series. The first guy to hit 5 home runs in a series, and 3-in-1 games since Babe Ruth. So, and being in New York and with the Yankees, it stuck, and it got a whole hell of a lot of attention, and mostly because it's the city of New York, and then of course the Yankees are involved, and that's always a big deal.
Reggie, you had a great high school career, and you got drafted. Well, not drafted, but you signed a football scholarship to play at Arizona State. I don't think a lot of people knew that.
Joe, I played for a guy named Frank Cush, who was really, there you go. Who said boy?
I did. He was an interesting coach for sure, a very successful coach. He put Arizona State's program on the map.
Yes, he was really a tough guy to deal with, and he'd make sure he beat you up. And I was one of those guys that got beat up. But he thought that he was preparing you for the future and the future of your career. And so I enjoyed playing for Frank Cush, and I got the crap beat out of me, really, the football player. And I would say, Joe, I don't know if you know this, or let me see, I want to make sure I get Mike. I want to make sure, I enjoyed football more than I did baseball. And I was a better football player than I was a baseball player when I was in college.
What position?
I was a tailback and a safety. I played both ways. And at that time in football, it was almost part. It was kind of part of being a football player that you had a defensive position and you had an offensive position.
Yeah, and then you were lucky you had Bobby Winkles as the baseball coach. I think you impressed him one day hitting a home run with your football gear on.
You know, they there was the guys in. We had a athletes dormitory at Arizona State University, and we would always talk in the hallway all the time. And I told him, I said, gosh, I'd like to play a little baseball here, et cetera, et cetera. There would never had a black player play on the baseball team, and the coach was from Arkansas, and so the players there, they didn't outright say it, but they kind of snickered about it. I said, I can play baseball too, and at the time, I was recognized as the top amateur baseball player in the country. It wasn't as known then, um, but one day we were having spring football practice, and I went over to Coach Winkles in my football stuff, and Bobby Winkles wound up being a major league manager with the White Sox as well as the Angels. And I said, Coach Winkles, I'd love to come out and try out one day. And he said, well, Reggie, I've heard of you. The scouts have told me how good of a player you are, so feel free to come and try anytime. So about 3 weeks later or so, we had a short day. I wanted to get out of spring practice. Football getting beat up and it was hot. And so I said to him, could I take a little batting practice? So I remember taking my shoulder pads off and having on a gray T-shirt. And I had football spikes on. As a matter of fact, Joe, you're old enough. I put on a pair of Rydell's.
Oh,
I had on a pair of football Rydell's, and the brothers called them Rydell's. So I had on a pair of Rydell football shoes, and I popped up a few balls, hit a few grounders, and then I hit about 5 or 6 in a row over the palm trees in right center, in the dead center. Hit a couple fly balls over the left field fence, and I laid let the bat down, and he looked at me and said, you can come here and play anytime you want. and I said, well, I do have a deal that if I have a 3.0 average, I can play baseball if I'm, have a 3.0 grade average. And so he said, well, I'll check with Coach Cush. And I said, okay, you ask him, because I'm not asking him. And, a couple of days later, I found out I had a 3.2. I didn't even know what my grade point average was. I had a 3.2, and I was released from spring practice, and my baseball career started. Now, I started in my freshman year, but I played football my sophomore year. And then after my sophomore year, I went into baseball. And as a baseball player, I led the college ranks in home runs that year. And then I was drafted. I was the number one pick in the draft, but I was not the number one pick. I was ranked as far and above the best college player, but the New York Mets did not want to draft me. Bobby Winkles said, Reggie, you're not going to be picked number one because you're dating out of your race. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, you're dating a Mexican girl. I said, well, my middle name is Martinez and I speak Spanish. Now, how does that relate? He said, well, I know the Mets aren't going to draft you because they think that you could create social issues in the major leagues. And so I really couldn't believe it, but I wound up marrying that girl. And, lasted about 4 or 5 years, and then I was divorced. But I was not drafted number one by the Mets because they thought I was dating outside my race, and my middle name's Martinez with Puerto Rican descent, and I was dating a Mexican girl. So that was that hubbub. That's why I wasn't a Met.
Well, they're the ones that lost out. Look at it that way, because what you did from there on is just remarkable. And again, you set an example for a lot of people, and you shouldn't let that tarnish what you did, because it certainly didn't. It might have helped you in the long run, but you took New York by storm when you went there with the Yankees, and I know you had some tips with the owner and with Billy Martin, because but you were successful and you made them a winner. Of course, everywhere you went, you made them a winner. You even helped Gene Autry's team when you went to Anaheim. That's another funny story about you at Anaheim was that contract you signed that said if you draw more than $3 million, I get $1 a head. Remember that? And then a lot of people don't know this about you, so I'm going to expose this. The money you got after they set the record attendance for Anaheim, you gave that extra money to the coaches because they didn't make as much as everybody else, and I applaud you for that. That was really cool. So
That's right. I was there 5 years, and every year I would always give them the first day. I'd give the coaching staff the first day, and we averaged about 38,000 a game. And so the coaches would split that up between them and get about 6,000-7,000 apiece. And I asked Bobby Clear one day, who was a bullpen coach, and I said, "What are you going to do with the money?" He said, "Reggie, I'm going to live off that over the winter." Yeah.
Hey, Reggie, you're involved with the Houston Astros these days, and you've seen the game up close. You've seen the game as a fan as well. What do you like about the way the game is being played today, and what concerns you?
Gosh, I don't know if we have 2 or 3 hours left, but I guess what I would say is and be very selective in how I say it. You cannot plug and play at this level in the game. You can do data input and you can do analysis of players. You can give you can rate a guy's range as to how many steps he covers and how much space he covers in the game, on the field, if you will. You can talk about exit velocity on the barrel when you make contact. You can talk about angle of attack. And all of those things are very important. You can talk about pitchers and their spin rates, etc. But if you try to diagnose the things that are important, they're all intangibles. In building a championship team, whether you're Bill Belichick or whether you're the great Vince Lombardi or the great basketball coach of Red Auerbach and the Celtics, and bring it up to the people that people know, the great coaches that have been in different places. The guy that was, I can't think of his name right now, but with the Saints. What's that coach's
Sean
name?
Payton.
Just retired. Sean
Payton.
Guys like that are able to read and quantify intangible value. And the player that I use is, if you take a look at Derek Jeter, who is a player that is, when you look at his skill set, it's not spectacular with range. His arm on a scale of 100 isn't in the 80s or 90s. His power is not in the 80s or 90s. His speed is not there as well. However, during an era that had Griffey, Alex Rodriguez, Manny Ramirez in it, Jeter was the best player in the game for a while because he was a winner. He was a champion. And that is because of his intangibles. And so there are players that will grade out so much higher. But in the ninth inning, in the seventh game of the World Series, you hit a ground ball at Derek Jeter, and you could bet your life he's going to pick it up without any flaws and throw it to first base and the guy's going to be out. It's not so much that I'm looking for the spectacular, but I'm looking for the person that has the right makeup, the right intangibles, the right intensity levels, if you will, the right character that will permeate your team in order to add value and quality to make you a champion. The professional ranks are built for championships and winners. And so while Brady doesn't have the greatest skills of a quarterback, or Montana didn't have the greatest physical skills of a quarterback, they were the best during their particular time. So there are players that do have it all. Jordan had all the character and intensity and intangibles that you could possibly have, as well as the skill set. But if you would take a Steph Curry, who isn't dominant physically, but has the skill sets and the intangibles, you can have that intangible that makes you a champion. Curry's not such a great example, because here's a guy that is included in being recognized as the greatest shooter of all time. But as far as him dominating the game physically, no, you're not going to dominate a game physically like a Karl Malone or an Abdul-Jabbar. It's the intangibles that, to me, don't get quantified or don't get counted. I'm going to be quiet for a while and let you guys respond.
You know, I want to go back to something, because I agree with you. There's a measurable that the analytics doesn't have on its screen, and I always call it, they don't measure your heart, they don't measure your desire. There's no measurable for that. But for you as a champion, what's the one it factor that comes into something you have in common with so many of those great athletes you just mentioned? There's got to be one thing that makes you guys winners that everybody else doesn't possess. What might that be?
Well, let's take an example right now that's going on in the game. Jose Altuve is 0 for 23 in the postseason. And for me, he still is the best player that takes the field. Now, do I include Judge? Yes. Do I say that Altuve is a better player than Judge? No. But I would like to put Altuve in the same class as Judge. And likewise, I think it's a greater compliment to Aaron Judge to be included in the Altuve level, because I asked Altuve in Seattle. He was 0 for 13 or 12, whatever the hell it was. And I said, when are you going to break out? He said, tomorrow. This was on a Friday. Tomorrow, was we were playing Saturday. And he said, if I don't break out tomorrow on Saturday, I'll break out on Sunday. Now, that's the attitude that you want from these guys. And so he hasn't had a hit since, and he's played a couple of more games. But for me, the intangible that he has is the same intangible that the greats have. You don't see it in his skill set unless you're around him. It's easy to see Judge's skill set because of his size, his dominance, and his power. But those guys are cut from the same cloth, and that cloth is an intangible one. And you can file it, I will say, when you put their heart on the line.
But that's the whole thing. You put your heart on the line, and he does the same thing. And you can't buy that. You can't teach that. That's a given quality. That's, like Mike said, in your heart. So
yeah, yes,
that's just an awesome talent. Yeah.
That, Joe, is where I disagree with the analytics, and certainly I will say and do recognize that analytics have a place in the game. It's not the foundation. The foundation of the game is the makeup of the players, the intangible the intangibles, recognizing motivation, leadership, integrity, character, what's between your shoulders, what's in your heart, what's in your stomach, and then go down a little lower and what's down there. When times get tough and times get hard, times get difficult, is this guy going to show up? And that is an innate intangible that you need to read because it's more important than the skill set.
Well, no better way to say it. That's exactly the way it is.
Reggie, as we're running out of time, we know your schedule is a little tight. I have one final question for you. You are a true fan of sport, and just talking to you and listening to you today, and you pay attention to the other sports as well. Give me one person that you've always admired from a distance that because of the way they play the game, maybe it's baseball, maybe it's another sport, that you've always admired from a distance and really has had an impact on you is how you follow the game.
You know, Mike, I could name a very long list. I'm proud of the fact that I'm a fan, um, and so of the game and an admirer of players and people. Um, I have a list of friends in my Rolodex that is very proud. I'm very proud of. I have notes that come to me from Joe Montana or Franco Harris or Johnny Bench or Mike Schmidt, um, or whether they be a comment that I get from Michael Jordan or an Abdul Jabbar or a Jim Brown, um, or so many of the players that I admired and looked up to when I was a youngster and eating dinner in Arizona in spring training with Fergie Jenkins, Billy Williams, and Willie McCovey. Whether it was a great comment from Juan Marichal or Bobby Gibson or my own friends and peers, Bench and Schmidt, whether it was a comment from Sieber or a comment from Steve Carlton or the guys that I have tremendous respect for, whether it's Smoltz or Maddox or Glavine, or whether it's a Rich Gossage or a Derek Jeter. Those are people and players that I admire and respect because of their makeup as people. And so, whether it's Jackie Robinson or Muhammad Ali, or whether it's Sandy Koufax, or whether it's Yogi Berra, whether it's Whitey Ford, or my interactions with Roger Maris and um, Mickey Mantle, all those guys I learned from Frank Robinson and Henry Aaron. And so my list goes on and on. Some of the interactions I have with George Brett, who we disliked each other when we played against each other. We were in the Hall of Fame together and didn't speak. One day, the person he was supposed to play with as a sponsor in the Hall of Fame didn't show up, and mine didn't either. And we got stuck together on the same card. We played 5 holes and never said a word. And I was even par, and he's probably 2 under. And I hit a drive about 300 yards, and he hit one about 330. And I said, "Damn, man, hitting it by me." And he said, "Reggie, let me tell you something, buddy. I'm honored to play with you." And from there, about 10, 12 years ago, we've been tremendous friends ever since.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's a great story. That's awesome. And you know what? You make people smile when you walk in the room. I can remember that little fish house we were in Monterey, and you walked in, and Drew Coble and I were sitting at the table with our group from that World Series of golf. And I said, "Drew, that's Reggie Jackson." He says, "Yeah, he gave me a dog one time."
That's right. That's right.
And Drew, for those that don't know, Drew was a longtime American League umpire. But It's just you fill up the room when you walk in, and again, we're proud to have had you on the show. This has been remarkable, and I thank you for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Oh, and whether there's a player that I didn't play with. He's probably 20 some years younger than me, Ken Griffey Jr.
Oh yeah,
Just a great friend, a person I love to talk to and be with. And my favorite player today, I probably prejudiced. I got to say, at the top of my list is Aaron Judge, but I have so much admiration for my favorite player in the game today is Jose Altuve. And here's a guy who's 30 years old.
yeah.
It's amazing. Reggie, again, we thank you so much for spending time with us today. Best of luck to you, certainly your health as well, and certainly the Houston Astros as they try and win a World Series. Again, we can't thank you enough for being part of what we do.
All right, guys, I got to take my boss here. She's ready to go get some breakfast.
We don't want to interfere with progress, so you go ahead and handle that. Thank you again, sir.
All right, guys.
you.
See you later.
All right, that's Reggie Jackson. He is our guest, and Joe West doesn't get any better than that. What a phenomenal player, but I think as our listeners will tell, what a phenomenal person, and we're blessed to have him today.
Yeah, we're very lucky we saw a side of him most of the people don't know. You know that he's a real person, and he's the little things that he's done outside the game we don't see, and you don't hear about the good things that happen. You know, there's a lot of things that go on in baseball you never hear about, and I'm glad we brought some of those to the forefront today. So,
well, we've had a lot of fun this year with 5460. We've had some great guests, and don't forget, folks, this is our last show for this season. We'll be back next year for sure. And also, we'll have a few of the best of 5460 episodes coming your way down the road. So for Joe West, I'm Mike Claiborne. We thank everybody for paying attention to what we had a chance to offer you in this baseball season. We look forward to talking to everybody next year in 2023 with 5460, the Joe West Podcast.